Are we ready? Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, December 18th. We'll have a roll call right quick, starting with Mr. Benny.
Jerry Benny, present.
John Derby, present.
William Wood, present.
And John Marshall, Chair Pro Tem, whatever, is here. And absent is Mr. Bell, who resigned, and Mr. Clark. We're missing one other, are we not? Melissa. Okay, quick agenda review.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This evening, we're going to go over some FEMA pick-em options, and I'll get into more of what that means in a presentation next. And we're also going to discuss our 2025 goals for the Planning Commission.
Okay. Do we have anybody public comment or anybody signed up for public comments this evening?
We do not.
Okay. So we'll get right into the commission business. And the first thing on the agenda is the FEMA floodplain regulations. So staff, you're on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chair. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the FEMA BIOP pre-implementation compliance measures, also known as PICM. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what all of what I just said means. We're then going to talk a little bit about the three PICM pathway options that the jurisdictions have to choose from. And then if the quorum of the commission is comfortable, I would ask for a recommendation to council. If not, that's okay too. So based on your comfort level after the presentation this evening, you can make a decision on whether you would like to make a recommendation to council. Okay, so for starters, I just really like this graphic explaining what is a floodplain. So the first level of lines there you see in the red is called the riparian buffer zone, which you'll also see referred to as the RBZ. And the riparian buffer zone is measured as 150 feet horizontally from each side of the ordinary high water mark. So the second line in that you see coming in from the red into the black is the 100-year floodplain. And for the purposes of administering the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP, FEMA identifies and maps flood hazard areas nationwide by conducting flood hazard studies and publishing flood insurance rate maps, also called FIRMs. These flood hazard areas, referred to as special flood hazard areas, are based on a flood having a 1% probability of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. This is also known as the 100-year flood. So in other words, the chances that a river will flow as high as the 100-year flood stage this year is 1 in 100, or a 1% chance in any given year. Structures within the special flood hazard area in a community participating in the NFIP are subject to floodplain management regulations that impact building standards and are designed to minimize flood risk. The National Flood Insurance Program is a FEMA program which is implemented and enforced by local jurisdictions. Through the NFIP, property owners, renters, businesses can receive flood insurance that is backed by the federal government. Participation in the NFIP is required for communities to receive federal flood insurance, federal loans, to execute federal leases in the floodplain, and response and recovery funding for federally declared disasters. This is an image of the Coburg firm, or the flood insurance rate map for the city of Coburg. You can see the areas in the light blue are what is considered part of the 100-year floodplain here in the city, which primarily runs along the Muddy Creek irrigation ditch that goes up Industrial Way, as well as a little bit that comes up Coburg Road there. There was historically a larger percentage of the homes that back up to the Mill Slough. You can see in this map here that's circled in a dark blue color. That was adjusted based on the property owner's request. They call it a letter to request a map change, and property owners can submit that to FEMA asking that they are no longer included in that category of flood hazard. So if you just kind of visualize in your mind where those properties are and what that looks like, Coburg really has very few vacant, undeveloped parcels that are located in the floodplain. And as I had mentioned, the Austin Abbey neighborhood and to the south there, were able to adjust the map. So why pick them? Why are we having to make this option here? In 2009, several environmental advocacy groups sued FEMA because they alleged that they were not doing enough to protect endangered species that depended on floodplain habitat, particularly salmon species and killer whales or orca whales. This had some back and forth, and in 2023, the environmental groups came back and said, essentially, it's been taking too long. And FEMA responded to that with this very quick deadline for communities that are participating in the NFIP to have to report one of 3 pick-em options. So we go back to that acronym, the pre-implementation compliance measures. So these are meant to be interim temporary measures until FEMA comes out with its full implementation to address this lawsuit. But in July of this year, FEMA announced that all communities that participate in NFIP will need to submit and report their desired pick-em pathway to FEMA by December 1st, 2024. So that's obviously a very short amount of time, particularly in our great state that has statewide land use planning law and certain processes that we must abide by. There has been some controversy over the legality, the ability for for jurisdictions to implement this, for FEMA to implement this. So it's come down, it's been met with some controversy. Most certainly, Governor Kotek wrote a letter to FEMA requesting an extension due to the uniqueness of Oregon's land use system. And FEMA responded to that with no ability to provide an extension due to the requirements of the lawsuit. And so all communities participating in the NFIP were required to report which of the 3 options they would select by December 1st, which I'm going to get into the 3 options next, unless anyone has any questions before we keep going. Okay, so the 3 options that FEMA presented for the pre-implementation compliance measures are to adopt a model ordinance, which was developed by FEMA, to adopt a permit by permit review process, or to do a moratorium on all development. So first we can talk a little bit, and before I get into the 3, I will also mention that as of December 1st, permit by permit was the default option. So even if communities did not report anything, they are to be operating on the permit by permit basis. Cities were also, or all communities were given until July of 25 to implement the ordinance. So theoretically, if a community reported that they would be pursuing the ordinance, we have the next 6 months to adopt it. And if it's not adopted, we still just remain on the default permit by permit basis.
I have a question.
Yes.
You know how FEMA? Do you know how FEMA got the responsibility or the authority to be responsible for the endangered species in the riparian area? How did that fall into FEMA jurisdiction? How did that happen? I mean, I thought they were a flood emergency and looking at it, and now all of a sudden, through their rules and regulations, they are responsible for protecting endangered species. How did that's there, to me, there's a bit of a disconnect there.
I don't know the exact answer, but what I would surmise is that it is because of their association with developing the flood insurance rate maps and being involved in the flood insurance, the federal flood insurance program.
Well, why would that have anything to do with the endangered species? I mean, I don't follow the connection.
Well, I don't have a good answer for you on that, Commissioner. It has, I think, to do with, the mitigating risk of developing in the floodplain versus destroying the habitat that's there. So,
That shouldn't be FEMA's responsibility. That should be the local jurisdiction's responsibility.
and I think that is one of the legal gray areas that has been brought up.
To me, it sounds like federal overreach or something that
Yes.
I'm gonna call Rumsey, whatever reason.
Yes, there has been some question. Like I said, there's been a lot of controversy, and I've heard from a lot of confusion about does FEMA have the authority to do this? Does FEMA have the authority to require jurisdictions or communities to do this? So there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions still out there. Nevertheless, we are still required to.
By who? Why are you required? I don't understand why the requirement.
The requirement is tied to the National Flood Insurance Program. So supposedly, if communities participating in the flood insurance program do not comply, we could lose access to, our property owners wouldn't be eligible for their flood insurance, and we wouldn't be, any jurisdiction or community that doesn't participate could lose the ability to apply for recovery funds after a disaster.
Of course, that begs the question again, is how did FEMA get the authority to do that? How did they get that kind of authority to tell, to restrict people from getting that insurance? Just because they want to?
I mean, no local municipality has ever adopted over for it. That's always not a mistake. I think, this is, FEMA's probably quite unwilling, but file with a lawsuit, so we're gonna protect Orca and Coleman.
And those are the kind of questions that are being asked.
Okay.
So. You ready to hear about them?
Go ahead.
The first option that I'm going to talk about tonight is the model ordinance option. The model ordinance was adopted or created by FEMA, excuse me, not adopted. And comes with a pretty rigid set of mitigation standards. So looking at if it's an undeveloped parcel, looking at how much ground is going to be, how much ground is going to go from being pervious to impervious, how many trees are going to be lost, and then offsetting those losses of the habitat elsewhere. I've heard it compared similar to how we mitigate wetlands, where if you're going to fill in a wetland, you need to mitigate it and buy a wetland somewhere else, because some of these sites aren't going to be able to recreate the loss of that habitat on the site itself. So then that would have to be taken care of off-site. So it mentions some of them here in the screen, 1 cubic yard or square foot must be mitigated by these ratios that are laid out in the model ordinance. This model ordinance is essentially incorporating the Endangered Species Act into local floodplain ordinances. It also includes performance standards to address the protection of species and habitats, and as I mentioned, includes the mitigation ratios. And this is just an example of one of the tables from the mitigation ratios. So you can see here, this is quite burdensome administratively. This is complex, and this is rigid, but it is option 1, and it is a potential option. Option number 2 is the permit by permit basis, which everybody has defaulted to as of December 1st, unless another option has already been implemented. As a reminder, this option requires permit applicants to develop a floodplain habitat assessment, documenting that their proposed development in the special flood hazard area, or the 100-year floodplain, will achieve no net loss.
Of no net loss of what?
Floodplain habitat.
For what?
That the
Habitat for what?
habitat that is created by a floodplain. So each floodplain development permit must review potentials for the impact to species and habitats. So the habitat assessment requires a professional, which there is still some question on what that professional's qualifications are, to perform this habitat assessment that demonstrates that there will be no net loss of floodplain habitat based on what they come up with in their assessment. There's some habitat assessment guidance methodology that came out from FEMA as well, that includes some of the mitigation ratios that are also included in the model ordinance. But the permit by permit basis is conducted site by site, so it's up to each individual permit, which gives it a little more flexibility. Number 3 is a moratorium on development. This is pretty straightforward. This prohibits all development in the floodplain. Option number 4, which isn't something that FEMA, yes.
Back up a second. Would require measure 56 compliance. What's that?
Measure 56 is when a jurisdiction needs to notify property owners that the uses allowed on their property are being restricted. This can have takings implications. This can also have measure, I think it's 46, when jurisdictions are required to compensate property owners because of the detriment to the value of their land because of the regulations placed on it. I should have mentioned before also, and we will look at this in a little table in a bit, but the model ordinance also has measure 56 implications, which are a very large burden to city staff.
So this is retroactive. What grandfather is it?
Existing development is grandfathered in, which is why Coburg is in kind of a unique situation because most of the properties in the floodplain are already developed. So, you know, think about out on Industrial Way. Most of those trees and that pervious surface has already been developed. And so where we are now sets the baseline. Any new development coming in from this point on will have to adhere to the new regulations. Okay, so this option obviously not presented by FEMA, but always an option is just to do nothing. This is not recommended. It is an extreme option and has the ability to impact residents, businesses' abilities to obtain assurance and recovery funds after a disaster. So just going back to take another look at that map and where some of those parcels exist. And I've kind of set this up just to be really simple and just have a quick look. Staff do not prefer options 3 and 4 as they are not in the best interest of our community, property owners or developers. And between options 1 and 2, there is a preference for the permit by permit basis from a workload and legal perspective and due to its individualized site requirements. Okay, so that's all I have in my presentation this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
How's the city of Eugene and Springfield? There's been quite a bit of 100-year flood plain.
I don't know which option those two specifically chose, but from the majority of cities I've spoken with, most have selected the permit by permit option.
Like Crestwell has.
A lot. Mhm. DLCD has been working with FEMA and they have deferred a lot to having local jurisdictions check with our own legal authority about the clear and objectiveness of the model ordinance, the Measure 56 implications. So DLCD is doing the best that I think that they can to facilitate, but they are not the driver of this. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Still don't understand how that connection got FEMA to habitat riparian protection. Well, have I ever worked with them or for them?
No, for them.
No,
Okay.
wouldn't.
I just realized now that this is crazy. I mean, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is just, I work with all the time. Yeah, it's burdensome. And I've done it for 7 years now. And I'm just opening the doors of path to despair. Not because of the mission of it, but it's just the odd compliance and the tables and modules you have to go through. For riparian land, or the pasture land, where in elevation was the present of Dr. Hall. I mean, we employ wildlife biologists in the region, in the Wild National Forest, just to do this. In addition to a rangeland specialist.
Who do you work?
Oh, fortunately, this is insane. I mean, I'm sorry. We're being.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
No, but I understand. So option 2.
That is what staff has a slight preference for.
Is there some way that, obviously, option 2 is preferred, and that's what we probably should recommend to the city council, but can we add the fact that we'd like clarification, or that I would, on how FEMA was able to do this, where the connection was, and we just get that letter out back to FEMA, said, how'd you get this authority?
I think that's something staff would be happy to dig into to get some maybe type of conclusion on how that association happened. I'm guessing it's something along the lines of flood emergency risk, flood habitat FEMA. But I absolutely, we can dig into more information.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that option 2 is the best for the city. And it's really best for the, probably the individual landowners, I would think, by the appearance of it.
I do also want to let the commission know that to date, some initial information was taken to council because we did have to meet that December 1st deadline. So the city reported that we would review the possibility of a model ordinance, but we have also confirmed with FEMA that if we do not adopt the model ordinance, we will just remain on the current default permit by permit. That was essentially a strategy to buy us a little bit more time so that we could investigate and evaluate what is best.
The staff have to put that-
Certainly not, I don't think on our own. It would require some legal work. Also, it would require a development code amendment. So we would be looking at a lengthy process that staff could handle that. But as far as checking the legal compliance, I think that is something we would want to check with our council on.
Okay, I'm done. Do we need to vote on this, a recommendation, or what do we?
Yes, a motion would be great.
I will at this time entertain a motion.
Second.
I think we have a motion on the table to accept or recommend option 2 to the city council. And Mr. Wood
First,
made the motion and was seconded by Mr. Derby. And we'll take a vote at this time. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Carried unanimously.
great. Thank you so much, Commission. The next thing we have on the agenda is to talk about our 2025 goals for the Planning Commission. This is something that will help inform City Council's retreat and help them just make connections about, particularly if there are any budget implications. A lot of the committees and commissions have different goals. I also thought it would be nice just to show you the goals from this year and looking at, we did accomplish several of those. I think we had a fabulous master plan development training with Patrick Wingard from DLCD. We haven't completed the review of the comp plan, but I think we sure gave that a nice digging into, and we will continue that. And then, I think the last two are kind of ongoing, but just to jog your memory and get the juices flowing about some potential 2025 goals. Feel free to reuse these. Feel free to come up with new goals.
You have any recommendation? Yeah. What we ought to be looking at as far as what you see upcoming?
I don't think I have anything specific. We have a couple project updates that we are working on that I think the commission will be hearing more about throughout the year, but I don't think that needs to be established as part of the commission's goals. So I think continuing to seek educational opportunities is always a good goal. If there are any particular topics that interest the commission, I thought getting on top of the master plan development was a really good one.
Wouldn't mind having a follow-up on that.
Would we like a DLCD follow-up?
Or
Patrick offered to come back anytime, so I think that we could absolutely make that happen.
you guys think?
Where does the urban growth boundary issue lie?
The urban growth boundary, as you may know, is very close to the city limits line. They're essentially the same at this point in time, which indicates that the city does not have the required 20-year supply of land for housing, employment, open space, which the first step in that process is a buildable lands inventory and looking at how much vacant land do we have in the city limits right now, comparing that with the existing zoning regulations, doing this sort of calculation of how many housing units and how many potential jobs can we fit in what we have. And that sets the baseline for how much more land we need, which we would then pursue an alternatives analysis and look at different locations of where the city might want to expand, looking at the pros and cons of each. And that can tie into, infrastructure expansion. What makes the most sense efficiency wise? Where should we expand? Compact cities, we want it to be contiguous with our existing boundaries. And so this is a UGB expansion is a multi-year process. I would say it's probably somewhere on our 3 to 5 year work plan, but we have already started thinking about how we're going to pursue some of those initial steps. So staff is looking at pursuing a grant from DLCD this year to conduct the BLI. So that will kind of be step one in looking at moving that forward. And the commission will be kept informed as we look at options to move that process forward.
I don't mean to beat a dead horse with this either, Megan, but in the past, we submitted our urban growth boundary plan. It was thrown back at us because we used too much farmland and et cetera, and they wanted us to go up Stallings Lane, take that. We came back, so we want a walkable city. That wouldn't include that, and then it just kind of stopped. So when Patrick was here, I believe he was kind of interested in our point of view as far as pursuing those issues. And I would assume that we were going down the road with that now, because we're way behind the state's requirement, aren't we, to submit a UGB?
I don't know that we have an exact deadline that we're late on. We've also, DLCD is aware of our current standing, and it's just hard to line up the resources to make these things happen. So we actually applied for the grant to do the BLI last year. Well, we didn't get it. So it's taking a little bit longer because we have to wait until the opportunity is available for us to do it. Yeah. But DLCD is definitely aware of kind of where Coburg is at, and we are not in any kind of compliance trouble or anything like that. But something we are definitely starting to lay the foundation for it and the planning department work plan.
Thank you. There's been some talk in the past about reviewing the subdivision code. I don't know if that's anybody's interest, but that was.
Well, I think it is. I think the development code for subdivisions, it'd be good to review it. Case in point, I've had a number of questions, and I brought this question up before. Is the last 3 developments that we've had, it was brought up about streetlights, and it was always been put down by staff, quite frankly, that streetlights aren't really what people want, but yet people are still asking about having streetlights in our developments. And we have that sort of in the development code, but it's kind of vague.
Yes, we could put subdivision review, absolutely.
So I agree with you. Good one. Thanks, John.
I'd also like to update the commission that we are working on a development code audit project that is part of the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. So as part of that rulemaking, DLCD put out a walkable model code. And so a consultant at LCOG is doing an initial comparison of what DLCD is recommending for walkable communities compared to what is existing in our code. And so they are looking at some of our residential sections. And so we'll be reviewing some more of the code as part of that project as well.
When you say you will be reviewing it, are we reviewing that or just staff?
You will review the project as it moves along.
Okay,
Mhm.
so we'll be involved in it.
Yes, absolutely. Tentatively, they're scheduled to come to the February meeting.
Very good.
A question on, our new water well that we have up on Stallings or that area.
Yes,
And they're gonna construct the feeder line to bring water into the system.
yes.
Will that allow abutting property owners? Since they say now we have public water adjacent to our property. Would that allow them to pursue annexation to the city as individually or?
Well, the property owners on Stallings could have pursued annexation at any time they desire. It requires a lot of work, a lot of resources, and a lot of analysis. So if the city is not taking on the work that I described earlier, that's something that private would have to conduct on their own.
Okay.
So it's feasible that a property owner or a group of them could get together on Stallings and try to put together an application for a UGB expansion they would have to do first before they were annexed into the city. And so
Probably not to their.
the water probably doesn't affect, that a whole ton.
Wonder if.
Don't know the answer to that.
I wonder if it might be good if you just could put out an email to the commissioners, especially those that are not present, that, if they have ideas for possible goals.
Okay,
Okay.
love that.
Okay, and then they could feed it back to us and just via email be fine, I think. If some sort of consensus on ideas for goals, but I think quite frankly, no, but.
Of course, they'd have to extend the wastewater system too. improve
And
the-
you know, the focus of so much of our development code and so much of our comp plan talks about compact development and being pedestrian oriented. So when you think about what that looks like for Coburg, Stallings, maybe that's not the best location. Another thing about Stallings is it's already developed. So Coburg would be looking at waiting for those to turn over and redevelop. So there's kind of a couple of things that I don't think make Stallings the most appropriate option.
Yes, I-
Very good. Next,
That's I think all that we have.
we have the updates and future agenda items.
Updates. Did everybody get a copy of the city administrator's report? Are there any questions? I can try to answer them as best I can, or I can get back to you.
Well, the only question I've got would be on the light industrial lands, any progress there and understand that a lot of the people that have been interested, you were telling me about they require more water than what we can provide. And then that we're looking at the possibility or getting, EWEB involved, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Those are in very, very, very early conversations, but the water supply. To back up just a little bit, the property owner of the new, relatively newly annexed 107 acres on the east side of I-5 was recently awarded a grant from Business Oregon to help get the property development ready soon, specifically aimed at semiconductor manufacturing. That type of industry requires a lot of water. Even so, without that industry in particular, sometimes these recruitments come in or these solicitations where different developers are looking for pieces of land. And a lot of them require water that is multiple times more than Coburg's supply. And on the other end, wastewater treatment that would significantly impact the capacity of our existing plant. And so those two things are kind of both working, what the future of that build out of that property looks like. I am not sure, and I don't expect that we will see anything there this year, although I could be wrong. But yes, there are early conversations about the feasibility of piping water in from EWEB. EWEB provides water to the city of Veneta, so it would be a similar arrangement where we would, I believe, still keep our existing wells, but just be adding an additional source for redundancy and to increase capacity.
Any more questions?
Oh, one thing I also would mention is this is transportation related, is that the first phase of the Collector Street project is just getting underway, and that will take place on North Coleman from Pearl Street up to Mill, where it enters the new subdivision where that part was already taken over. And from there, it will turn left on Mill to the park. That will be phase one. Oh, yes, they were out doing survey work.
Is any of the money from the TUF going to that project? So,
That project was actually funded through the MPO. Those are federal funds that went through Lane County so that it could be made into local money so that the city could manage the project ourselves.
Okay. Any other questions or Chad? Any other information you want to provide this evening?
I don't think I have anything further. Thank you all so much.
And I wish you a very Merry Christmas and everybody else that's here, and we'll adjourn the meeting.
Likewise, happy
Close the public
holidays.
hearing. Thank you very much.
6:43.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah.